everybody. It's great to be back here again. Tomorrow's Friday, Parashat Matot Masai, double portion. What can we say? We're completing the book of Numbers. It's a difficult time as we approach the destruction of our temple, the Tisha B'Av, in 3 weeks. What can we talk about? I'd like to, I saw a very, very interesting class about Rav Castiel, a rabbi from Eli, who spoke about how we see the woman's side is very powerful here in the portion. In the last few portions of the book of Numbers, connects to what my wife Leah spoke about the role of a woman. I'd like to add to that, maybe take that concept and develop it a little bit. I'd like to first begin by mentioning the crisis that we're in a terrible crisis, where we see there's an identity issue here in the world. And today there's an extreme, it's very, very radical, progressive individuals in the world that are lost identity. They lost their belief in God. They don't know who they are, what they're here in this world, and the ethical decisions they're making are become so far-fetched that they're so not real. They're so against the norms of society, where we see the effects on the young generation, unfortunately, where they're being taken to, and some of them are being changed. There are irreversible changes made, damaging this young generation and being taught the wrong way. It's so painful and so sad to see. And we see what's going on. The society is really, really in a bad situation. And the only way to rectify that is by returning, to come back, to return to God, to be able to know who we are. When we know who we are, when a person identifies with themselves, God is within every one of us. We connect to God when people are really close to themselves. In reality, they are close to God. Because being truly close with yourself and happy with yourself, then you feel the divine within you. But when there's an unfortunate situation where people are running after in the wrong directions of life, in reality they're very sad. It's a tremendous sad. Depression is on the rampage and all that. It comes from lack of identity. And the Torah is so clear in giving us boundaries and guidelines. That's really what the desert is all about. The desert is there to give us boundaries. And the Torah, of course, as our spiritual guide for the world, the boundaries and as a nation who we are and what positions and what purposes everyone has. And when we see someone tries to breach others, roles of others, the damage, for example, Korach, and all that, what happens when there's a breach in person's function and roles. It's a very, very strong message throughout the book of Numbers. Rav Kook talks about beautifully in his Pinkas. Rav Kook talks about two sides, about, on one hand, the intellect versus emotions. And he speaks about when they're working together in harmony, everything is well. But naturally, the intellect pushes away the emotions, and emotions pushes away intellect. There has to be harmony. It's the woman who has the emotional side. And the men have the intellectual side, and that they have to work together in harmony. And Rav Kook goes on to decide, to discuss, when there is a breach in that, then chaos breaks out. Everything goes wrong. And so it's really, and we see how important both of these aspects are. And what I thought of an interesting idea is that Rabbi Akiva in the Tractate of Sanhedrin, it's something that's a powerful statement. He comes along and he says the generation of the desert does not have a share in the world to come. And it's something hard to grasp. The generation of the desert, they receive Torah. What's going on? They don't have the share in the world to come. And Rabbi Akiva mentions the reason is because, well, obviously, he brings down the verse to prove it from the verse that talks about the sin of the spies. So that they're despising the land of Israel. They're not wanting to leave the desert. There was something that literally brought about, that terrible punishment and not having the world to come. And of course, it's meant to be taken 100% literally. There are different understandings here. But obviously, Rabbi Akiva is trying to say that the land of Israel is intrinsically connected to the world to come. And the fact that the spies, when they gave the evil report and that whole generation was cried and was taken into that whole scene, there was something wrong with them. And the problem was that they were totally resolved to remain in the desert situation of where Torah was given, and they had this sort of incubator of having everything given to them. But they forgot about something very, very important. The most important thing is to build their homes in the land, to the emotional side. And here I thought of that interesting idea is really here we see their sin was that they were too much focused on the intellect without the emotional aspect. And that's really, fascinating that the book of Numbers brings the last part of the portions from Korach on, really. There's a lot of mention of women in the portion, things that relate to women in the portion. Number one, our portion opens up with the laws of oaths, and we see how much the woman is mentioned there. If you look at the beginning of the portion, you see everything is about the husband having to nullify the oath of the woman. So the husband's coming from this intellectual side and nullifying the wife's oaths. But why is she why is she the one who has to nullify her oaths? Is because she's more involved in the ground, in the practical things and emotional side. When people are emotional, they sometimes say things they don't mean, or all kinds of things they're saying, and that requires balance, a check and balance from the intellectual side. And that's a powerful thing. Also, the battle of Midian. If we look at the end of, we look at the desert situation of Sichon and Og, the battle that took place against the giants in the desert of Sichon and Og, and there no one of Israel was hurt. But when it comes to the Midianites in the end of the portion, which we read about it, we see how in the portion of Balak, we see how the Midianites, the women, were able to entice the males. So what they weren't able to achieve through battle, the Sichon and Og, they achieved through enticement, the sexual enticement of the men, to bring them down to idol worship. So here we see the reverse, when the bad emotions, when that side, the women utilizing their side to do damage, and that is the evil, brings evil forces in the world. And that Moshe Rabbeinu says, go out. God tells Moshe Rabbeinu to go against that, and to go against the Midianites, tzro'otam, to eliminate the Midianites in the desert. That we see the opposite side. God created the side of good and evil. That's the evil side that has to be eliminated. So those kind of things, again, come right up in the portion. As well, we see that something that stands out very strongly is we see that the daughters of Tzlofchad, as I mentioned, we spoke about that in the past, there are 5 daughters, and the number 5 is Hey. Hey represents the female aspect, as we all know. In Hebrew, if you take a noun and you want to make it into a female, any noun that ends with a female ending of a Hey is considered a female noun, right? And for example, woman, Isha, her name is a woman, and the letter Hey is the ending of her name, of a word that means woman. So it's a female word, I'm trying to say. A masculine word would have other letters. There are 2 female letters, the Hey and the Tav. Otherwise, it's a masculine word. So the Hey, there are 5 daughters of Tzlofchad. Hey is 5. Not only that, each one of their names ends with a Hey, which is really interesting, is that the female letter representing that side, which is really fascinating. But the daughters of Tzlofchad, for example, with the reasoning of dividing the tribal divisions, that logic didn't sit with them. They felt that inner drive of their emotions that they deserve a portion of the land, and they went to complain to Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe returns to God, and God says they're right. So we see how important that female side is, to add that emotional aspect in the picture, and that emotion will bring about the true the true picture. Because if he's only intellect, so it's like a robot, there's something missing in the picture, and you need to have both of those to work together in harmony. And what's fascinating is the name of God is a 4-letter name, Yud Kei Vav Kei, 4 letters. There are 2 female letters and 2 masculine letters in God's name. Yud is the masculine one. It begins with the wisdom, represents wisdom. The first Hey represents Binah, understanding. It was known that women are given a special understanding. The Vav represents the masculine side, the Zeir Anpin, as we say in Kabbalistic literature. And then the Hey is the Malchut, the final Hey is the woman's side. So we see how that perfect harmony exists within God. That harmony, when unfortunately people break apart and they lose their identity, so they fall apart and they take God out of their lives. And that's what it says. The beauty when a man and woman live together, as if they merit, zachu means if they were able to rectify themselves properly and cleanse themselves, living a life of spirituality, so the divine presence rests within them. That's ish v'isha, man and woman. If you take out the divine presence, as we all know, the Yud Hey, the masculine and the feminine side, you're left with fire, because the word in Hebrew is ish, is fire. It's a famous teaching And this we see how important both aspects are within that, those two, within male and female, to work together in perfect unification. And here we see, and I'd like to mention, we see about Reuven and Gad, and the other, of course, Menashe also received the cross of Jordan, but they didn't request it. Reuven and Gad, we all know, they come along to Moshe Rabbeinu and they're requesting inheritance across the Jordan River. And it's a very logical, manly thing, right? This intellect, and something that makes extremely sense, perfect sense. If we have a tremendous grazing land there with our flock and sheep and all that, they could, enough feed over there to feed them. And not only that, we'll give much more room for the rest of Israel when they inherit the other part of Israel, of the land in the western side of Israel. So we'll give much more inheritance to the other tribes. It's very logical. So how does Moshe Rabbeinu respond to their request? He's worried right away it's going to be another sin of the spies, where it caused a terrible tragedy and a delay in entering the land by 40 years. But right away, what is their response? No, we will cross over the Jordan and we will fight. And they add on, not only they're going to fight 7 years of the battles for the land, they wait there 14 years so the land is divided into all the tribes and all that, and then they go back home. So we see from their very logical, manly request, all of a sudden, they react so emotionally in that perfect harmony. Now, I always thought, it always came to mind, what about their wives and children? They were left behind on the other side of the Jordan. So obviously their wives were superwomen, and they were so supportive of them to remain there. And not only that, to have to wait for 14 years. Obviously they probably went to visit them in between, I assume, but it was still extremely difficult to not permanently come home for 14 years on a special mission of helping conquer the land. But that came from the very, very powerful wives that together they built their beautiful homes. And that's something that's, again, ingrained in this week's portion so powerfully. We also can see, mentioned as we're talking about these both sides, we see as well in the portion of Korach, where the Talmud brings down, the wife of Korach brought him down under, literally. And whereas the wife of On ben Pelet, who was from the house of Reuven, she saved her husband. And we see that again the two sides of the women. When the woman is focused on her, knows who she is, and is identifying with herself, and is very, very, smecha, happy with her lot, and focusing on who she is, and then she's able to save her husband. But if the woman, God forbid, is not in the right place, she can bring her husband down. And this is what's brought down. It's a beautiful expression brought down from Tana de Belial. Elijah the prophet brings down a teaching. It says, Ishak shira osa ratzon bala. A kosher woman does the will of a husband. What does it mean a kosher woman does the will? It sounds a little strange. Does the will of a husband? What is she, some kind of servant of the husband? But no, the answer, of course, a deep understanding, which all commentators explain. When the woman is able to make the will of the husband, the husband has all this energy, right? He, as we said before, comes from his particular angle, the side of the Zah, as we say, the Vav of the divine name. But it needs a vessel, it needs direction and focus. The woman's goal is to shape and mold the will of her husband to focus him in the right direction. She's going to stand behind him, just like the wives of Reuven and Gad, they stood behind the husbands and the tribe of Menashe. They have the tribe. And any time when a wife stands behind a husband, that's what we call molding him in the right direction. Otherwise, God forbid, it can be a situation of Korach where he's brought under. So a woman has that important function together with the husband in harmony to strengthen one another and to bring the best out of her husband, to help mold and shape him. And so it's an important thing to focus and to be aware of. I'd like to mention another important point that I thought of, came to mind, was if you look in the world right away, there's a tremendous trend in the world to try to, we mentioned before, to try to force upon women to do man things, right? Like especially in the armed forces, we see how many there's always this women live and all these, saying it's chauvinistic to say the women are not fit to be in certain fighting units and all that. In Israel, it goes on here in the country. And obviously it's obvious that in certain situations men are built for certain things that women can't do, and to try to force upon the women to try to you literally force them to do what men can do is again, it's damaging. It's doing permanent damage to women, and not understanding who women are, not respecting them who they are, and the world is so again, what's the word, confused about identity and who is what and who is where, is that they're losing it, and these are the kind of things that are going on and causing tremendous damage. If we look at, for example, the Nobel Prize, and here's a perfect example, the Nobel Prize, which began, if I recall, somewhere in the or maybe early 1900s or late 1800s. If we look at the statistics of the Nobel Prize, I think there was something like 60 or 60 women out of the 900 winners of the Nobel Prize. Why is there such a difference of 60 women and so many other men that merit it in the Nobel Prize? A lot of people would say, it's chauvinistic, they chose the men over the women. But in reality, obviously the men that won the Nobel Prize, we have to always realize that their women were behind them as well. So it wasn't only the 60 women that won, but it was all the other 800 some odd Nobel Prize winners that if it wasn't for their wives and their spouses standing behind them, strengthening them in their work and being there, they wouldn't be able to do it. It was not a solo mission in this world. I assume, I don't know how many were not married or whatever, but I'm just assuming that fact. And there were 60 women that won. Of course, the husbands were on their other side as well. So it's really, again, it's not like when people looking at statistics, you have to look at both sides. There's always two sides, and there's always the one that's behind the scenes in each picture. You have to try to look at both sides of the picture to really get the true picture. So this week's portion comes to an end with the daughters of Tzlofchad, towards the end, and as inheriting the land. It's really fascinating. It ends with that. But to strengthen the daughters of Israel, that we know that the land is the malchut, the land is the kingship, and the home of Israel will not be built without the proper molding of the mother of the home, and the land of Israel, our motherland, our homeland. It's not going to be built on intellect alone. We need to have that emotion, that love for the land, and that is really where the door of the generation of the desert went wrong. As I said before, they were totally pulling. Unfortunately, they were into this intellectual realm and forgot about reality. And what grounds us is the malchut, is the land. That's the woman of the home who gives us that proper direction and that emotion. This small, again, just to touch upon a couple of small ideas of the portion we can develop into a lot more. I'll just end with a story. I think I should end with the stories of Ari Levine, great giant in the city of Jerusalem right before the formation of the state of Israel. And there was a terrible famine in the land. And he was worried about his children. He's a very wealthy man that was lending money, and he lent a lot of money to a lot of different people. So Rav Ari Levine said, let me try my luck with him. He lent a lot of money to others. He should obviously do the same to me, I'm sure. And he came with some ancient manuscripts he had, as he wanted to give collateral for the loan. And when he went to the man, he goes, I'm not loaning you money. I'm not going to lend you anything. He goes, why? You loaned everyone else, but me, no. He goes, well, I know that you're a righteous man, and you're not going to be upset with me, and you're not going to speak bad about me and all that. But all those other people I loaned money to, if I wouldn't give them the money, they would never let me hear the end of it. They'd disrupt my lives. And he goes home, Rav Ari Levine, to his wife, and he's broken. He goes, look, where did he get me my righteousness in this world? Helping people and all this. Now my own children are starving and all that. And his wife just put him in his place, and she said, something? Just realize that everything's from Hashem, and we will get through this, and you have to straighten yourself out immediately. And immediately he got out of his down, you call it. His wife straightened him out right away. And shortly after that, they received something from something came abroad, I think from America, and they were able to survive the difficult situation. So his wife said, see, you have to have faith in Hashem, and everything works. So here, husband, tremendous man, all the things he does, but think about his righteous wife behind him, pushing him through and all that thing, and our righteous wives that stand behind us and help us be the people we are and help us find ourselves. It's such an important to appreciate our spouses, and of course it goes both ways as well. And it's just again a little taste of the importance of realizing the roles of our lives, of each one of us and what we are. And God willing, as we continue, we will begin now the book of Dvarim, which looking forward to the land of Israel. Shabbat Shalom, B'sorot Tovot, Yeshuvot v'Nechamot.